Today I'm going to wade into a 3-week series addressing perhaps the cultural issue of our day. This series is called One Blood, One Race. And as I enter into this, I want to share with you a foundational belief that I have, and it's this: that whatever problem you face, whatever questions you have, either as an individual or as part of our society, the scriptures provide an answer. Not only a answer, but the answer. And so during this series, as I address the topic of racism, I want to explain what the Bible has to teach. Now, of course, in this process, I may end up sharing a few opinions. I'm going to try not to, because my opinions really don't matter. What matters are God's opinions, and that's where I'm going to go. But if you listen to the media, whether it's mainstream or social media, there are some buzzwords out there right now that are dominating. They are speaking to us very loudly, like phrases such as Black Lives Matter, white privilege, systematic racism, mass incarceration. And so let's walk into this. Let's walk into this together. And I would ask this: hear me out. Don't judge any particular phrase I may say, but judge the essence of this message, because I'm here to preach a sermon and not just share little tidbits, okay? But first, to start with, I would say in our society, racism is a reality. I think that would be pretty hard for any of us to deny that racism does not exist. I think many of us, if we're honest with ourselves, we've experienced it in one degree or another. And I think about this during my lifetime. I've seen that people of color, especially African Americans, at least in my neighborhoods that I've grown up in, have had a much higher threshold or barrier to overcome to get into the best housing, the best jobs, to get loans for either mortgage, schooling, or small business. And it's just a reality. And again, this is my opinion. Well, not my opinion, my experience has shown me this. Fact is, if you look at our prison system, and you look at our population, our general population, the numbers in our general population don't match the percentages in our prison population. For example, what I mean is this, is in the United States, 64% of our population is white. But in our prisons, only 30% of the population is white. In our culture, 16% of our culture is black. And yet, in our prisons, they occupy 33% of our prison population. And for Hispanics, it's 12% of the general population, 23%. And so, in the prison. And so you've got to ask yourself, it sure seems like people of color are more likely to end up in jail than people who are, well, of course, a white person is color too, than white people. And you've got to ask yourself, why is it that they're more likely to get there? Why is it that that statistic is true? If we look at the nation's history, slavery and indentured servitude was abolished in 1865 as an outcome of the Civil War and by the ratification of the 13th Amendment, which the 13th Amendment of our Constitution says that racism and indentured servitude is no longer permitted. But there's a clause in there, and if you don't believe me, you can go look this up. The clause says, except as a punishment for crime. And there are some historians that have looked at this and said after the Civil War, the South needed to be rebuilt. And labor was needed for that. And so that's why some would say that that's why that was put in there. And in mass, blacks who at the time were all of a sudden had freedom but had no jobs, they were being arrested on relatively minor charges such as vagrancy and loitering, and then put into what we call chain gangs. And so there is a certain amount of our culture where you look at and just going, yeah, you can't really deny this. And why is it that it was only till 1965 that blacks could vote in America throughout the entire United States? Now, before that, certain states allowed blacks to vote, but 1965, imagine that. That's when this came into to play. And I need to confess to you that I grew up in an atmosphere. It was white middle class. I was born in the 50s, but I grew up in an atmosphere where I was just kind of, I don't know, just the atmosphere was you fear and you become suspicious of people of color, especially of black people. That was just my reality. And you know, I'd say I've been impacted. In fact, this whole Black Lives Matter, I think there's some good that's come out of this. And the good is it's caused me to look into racism. I've never done so much reading and research on this, both sides, to see what's going on. And I can tell you this, about 2 months ago, or before George Floyd's death, if you would have said, Fred, you're a product of white privilege, I would have said, get out of here, no way. I've achieved where I am because of hard work. I haven't experienced white privilege. And today, because of just reflection, I would say, no, that's not true. I have experienced white privilege. Now, have I worked my tail off? Yes, I've worked my tail off in life. But I think I've experienced that. And why can I say that? I can say that because I don't think I've ever been profiled. In other words, eyes on me because of my color. I don't think I've ever caused anybody to fear or be suspicious of me. I don't think I've faced extra barriers to go through schooling or to get a mortgage or to get a job. I don't think I've worked hard. I've gone through barriers, but not extra barriers based on my color. And this one is the one that really gets me. When I was about 18, 19 years old, I grew up in the Bay Area. I was in San Mateo, and if you're familiar with that area, one of the main high schools is Aragon High School. And I went up behind the high school one Friday night with my then girlfriend, who was not Meredith, but another girl. And there's some kids in here. Now, kids, understand this, that this is part of my story. And so, you know, and I was living apart from God at the time. I didn't have a relationship, but I went up there and I got some beer, which was illegal for a 19-year-old to have beer. And it's double illegal to drink and to drive at the same time. And then furthermore, I had some marijuana with me, and we were smoking marijuana parked in the car in this parking lot. All of those things are bad. I don't share with them to say, well, I did it, you can do it. I regret deeply how I lived a lot of my life back then. But as I was there in that parking lot, a police car came in. I was the only car there, came in, stopped right behind me, blocked me in, got out of the car, a white police officer, rolled down my window as the smoke billowed out and said, what are you doing? And I was busted. And so I just figured, well, you know, I'm not going to fool this guy. Let me just tell him what I'm doing. And he let me go. He let me go. He just says, well, let me take your beer and don't do this stuff. You know better than that, and let me go. And I got to believe, I don't know 100%, but I'm about 99.9% convinced of this, that if I were a person of color, especially a dark person, I would have been taken away in handcuffs right then and there because I was breaking all kinds of laws. So anyhow, I just share all this as an introduction to say, I believe racism is real. Okay, that's my main point here. Just took a lot of words to say it. Now, systematic racism, let me talk about that because this is the definition of this. It claims that the United States was founded as a racist society, that racism is thus embedded in all social institutions, structures, and social relations within our society. And that is a statement I do not agree with. I do not agree that this nation was founded as a racist society. I think that's the problem. Do I think that there's racism that has found its way into parts of our system? Absolutely. But not because we've been founded that way. I would say this, racism is embedded in the human heart. It's embedded in the human heart. Why? Because there's sin in the human heart. That's where it's embedded. And if you question this, by the way, racism is not white on black or brown on black or brown on white. It's not the shade. It is much deeper than that. Otherwise, you think of who some of the most racist people were the Nazis, and what were they doing? They're killing other white people. But look, even in the scriptures, we can look in the scriptures and say in Acts chapter 6, There was a tension between the Hellenistic Jews and the Grecian Jews, that they felt like they were getting treated unequally. You can take a look at the Samaritans and how the Jews treated the Samaritans. We can take a look at the tension between the Jews and the Romans. We can take a look at Peter, who was told to go minister to the Greeks, and he refused to, and then God gave him a dream while he was at the house of Cornelius. 3 times had to tell him, go to the Greeks. You know, they're not the enemy, if you will. And so even in the scriptures, we have evidence that racism was existing thousands of years ago. It's an issue. It's embedded in the heart of man. Now let me talk about Black Lives Matter. And by the way, I'm getting to the scriptures, okay? I just want to make sure I set the table. And this is setting the table not only for this message, but for this series. Now, Black Lives Matter, that statement in and of itself, I agree with 100%. Black lives matter. And I can say I agree with that without adding anything else to it. Yeah, but so do. No. Let's not go there. Let's just say black lives. Yes, they matter. Yes, they matter. I would say the goal of the movement is very noble. Their goal, if you go to the website, is to abolish racism. Who would not want to see that happen? Amen. They also want to create a world free of anti-blackness. Now, I don't know if they're going to create that by creating a world with anti-whiteness, but the goals are noble, but they're misdirected because God is not part of it. They want to do this on their terms, on human terms, and they have expressed they will go to any length necessary. It's a movement of anarchy, of anarchists that want to demand racism end. And I have a problem with that because the issue is a heart issue. It's not a skin issue. Listen to this. This is directly from the Black Lives Matter movement website, and I encourage you to go there to look it up. I'm going to quote, "We disrupt the Western prescribed nuclear family structure requirement." In other words, what they say as an organization, we don't believe in the nuclear family, mom, dad, and kids. We disrupt that. That is part of the evil of our society. Second thing, we do the work required to dismantle cisgender privilege. And if you're wondering, well, what's cisgender? Cisgender is simply this. You identify with the sex that you were given at birth. I was born as a male, so I identify as a male. They would say because you identify with the sex that you are at birth, you have privilege that others don't. No, I shouldn't. I just don't agree with that. It goes against everything in me. They also, regarding the police, they say, we know, they state this as a fact, we know that police don't keep us safe as long as we continue to pump money into our corrupt criminal justice system at the expense of housing, health, and education investments. We will never truly be safe. I don't think you can state that as a fact. You can find isolated incidences, but I don't think that can be widespread. So I have some issues, not with the statement, Black lives do matter. I have problems with the movement. How'd we get here? Let's turn the clock back about 180 years. Let's go to the seeds of Darwinism. The seeds of Darwinism. I think a lot of this caught fire by then. Now, racism had already existed, but I think it got supercharged through Darwinism. And Darwinian Evolution says this, is that man, or humans, changed from molecules to man over millions and millions of years. And in this process, death was just part of a natural occurrence. It was not a penalty for sin. But man came from molecules to who they are today. And that means there was intermediate states of development, and these states, some of the steps of this evolution meant that man came from apes. Therefore, certain races are more developed or advanced than others, And that's this whole idea that we're on this different evolutionary scale. And honestly, it is outright insulting to suggest that. Look at this picture. Where are you on the evolutionary scale? This is a picture that has been shown in our schools to children, which I believe any system that teaches evolution and does not present creation is innately developing racists. And look at the scale. It's not a scale of just going from a monkey to a man, but look at the gradients of color there. The implication is the whiter you are, the more advanced you are. I don't buy it. Darwinian evolution says this, is that Caucasians, or the white person, has evolved from the chimpanzee, which the chimpanzee is the smartest of all the ape family. Asians have evolved from orangutans, and blacks have evolved from gorillas, the strongest but not the smartest. And I'm telling you, that's just got to break the heart of God to see this being promoted. And if you talk about anything being embedded in our society, it's the idea of evolution where there is no God, that we just came over a certain period of time to be. Darwin wrote this book, The Origin of the Species, in the 1860s. And the subtitle was Preservation of Favored Races in the Struggle for Life. He said this, he basically made observations about plants and animals, and at the end of this book he said, it won't be long before we can apply this theory to man as well. And then a few years later he wrote a book called The Descent of Man, and in this he said, all people who weren't like him, white, were lesser, they were degraded, they were a lower race, a lower class. And he fit into that group, pygmies. He fit into that American Indians, and any ethnic group different from his own. What was the result of all this? Even back going 100 years? Let me share with you a story that certain people have advised me, Fred, don't even share this story. But I think we need to understand, why is it we've got so many people rioting and saying enough is enough? Because this has been something that people of color have had to deal with God not in the picture. Let me tell you the story of Ota Benga. Ota Benga was born in 1881 in Central Africa. Ota Benga, and I've got a picture of him there, Ota Benga was a husband and a father of two. He was a hunter. His tribe was a hunter. Now, he was a pygmy. He was only 4 feet 11, 103 pounds. He went out. He was on a successful hunt. He came back, and his village was destroyed. His wife and his children were slaughtered. And it was only a matter of a couple years later, he was taken captive. And this war on his village was perpetrated by the Belgian government, who had declared a war against evolutionary inferior natives. Ota Benga came to the United States, and there he was put on display in the 1904 St. Louis World's Fair. He was on display in the anthropology section, and he was claimed to be the missing link, the half man, half ape. And their attendance in one day skyrocketed to 40,000 for people to come and gawk and see at him. And they tried to spit on him and call him names, and it was just a brutal, horrible treatment. And get this, July 23rd, 1904, Scientific American, right? That's a reputable magazine. They wrote this about pygmies. They said, quote, "They are small, ape-like, elfish creatures. They live in absolute savagery, and while they exhibit many ape-like features in their bodies, they possess a certain alertness which appears to make them more intelligent than other Negroes. The existence of the pygmies is of the rudest. They do not practice agriculture and keep no domestic animals. They live by means of hunting and snaring, and eking out this means by thieving from the big Negroes." That would never find its way to print today. That is why some people say, I got a problem with America. In 1906, 2 years later, he was transferred, I don't know, either bought or hired by the owner of the Bronx Zoo. And the Bronx Zoo actually put him in a cage with the gorilla, with the apes. And the New York Times reported that a Bushman shares cage with Bronx Park apes. That was the headline news. 2 days later, in September 10th of 2006, some black pastors got together, ministers, and one of them wrote a letter to the editor, and his name was Reverend Gordon. He said, "Our race is depressed enough without exhibiting one of us with the apes." 2 days later, the retort from the editor of the New York Times said this: "The Reverend colored brother should be told that evolution is now taught in the textbooks of all the schools and that it is no more debatable than the multiplication table." It's no more debatable than the multiplication table. Well, as the influence of Darwinian evolution spread, the Bible was increasingly taught as myth. So evolution, under the guise of legitimate science, came in and said, because we have science, it trumps this. This is myth, folklore. Let's toss this out. And we're experiencing that now, living in a society that for the most part has abandoned God. If you look, and the one thing Darwin did not have that we have now is the study of genetics. And genetically, we know that our difference in the color of your skin happens to do with how much melanin your body has. That's the difference. Some people, if you have more melanin, you're going to be darker. If you have less, you're going to be lighter. And in fact, genetically, the difference between you and any other person in the planet, any other person, is only 0.2%. So you can take the person that is most unlike you, and there's only a 0.2%. So in other words, we are 99.8% completely the same. I want to share with you, this may surprise you, but the concept of race is not found in the Bible. Yes, there is speaking of cultures and villages and tribes and nations, but there is no mention of race in the Bible except for the human race. That God created a perfect world and created the first two beings, humans, in his image. They were created to rule over the rest of creation. Mankind rebelled, and then God sent a flood, and after the flood, God restated this plan to Noah and his 3 sons. And we, because we are created, we all share the same bloodline. We are all related. All of us are related. We're all, I guess, cousins to some number out there, but we are all related. Doesn't matter the color of your skin. Doesn't matter your culture. We are all related. And here's where I want to come in with what the scriptures have to say about this. Here's the creation perspective that is presented by the scriptures. Here's the answer to what is going on. First, we are all created by God. You, me, Otabanga, everybody. We're created by God in his image. Listen to this, Genesis 2:7. Then the Lord God formed a man from the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and the man became a living being. In other words, everything was in place. The whole airway system was already there. The ability to put oxygen into the blood was already there. God created that. To pump blood, everything, it was already set, and then the breath of life was breathed into. Second thing is, we are all made in God's image. We're all in his image. When we see one another, who do we see? We should see there is a masterpiece that God created. Listen to this, Genesis 1:26. Then God said, let us make mankind in our image, in our likeness, so that they may rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky, over the livestock and all the wild animals, and over all the creatures that move along the ground. We're made in his image. Third, we're all one blood made into one race. One blood made into one race. This is found in Acts chapter 17, verse 26, which states, and he, God, has made from one blood every nation of men to dwell on all the face of the earth, and has determined their pre-appointed times and the boundaries of their dwellings. 8 years ago, I was fighting for my life. I was bleeding, and the bleeding internally was not identified, and I kept bleeding. And to keep me alive, I had to get transfusions. I had to get 6 transfusions. And as I laid there in ICU, looking at that bag of blood pumping into my vein, I can tell you this: I could care less if it was a white person, a brown person, a black person, a male or female. It made no difference, and it didn't matter. Because why? Because we're all one blood. Now, I would have gotten concerned if they had horse blood up there or cat blood or something. It would have killed me. But we're one blood. Fourth thing is, we're all loved by God. We are loved by God. We have to understand that God created you. He created you, and He gave you your particular set of genes, your particular color, ethnicity, background, all of that. He gave it to you. God so loved the world, black, white, brown, every shade in between, that He gave His one and only Son, that whoever believes in Him shall not perish but have eternal life. Evolution, a fruit of evolution, says that there are superiors in this humanity. And that just opens up the flood doors to discrimination based on culture, on gender, on skin tone. But the scriptures condemn a long list of abuses and exploitations on the unborn, the young, the old, the sick, the poor, the handicapped, the illiterate. The Bible condemns all that. Why? Because we're loved by God, and we're all created in His image. He made us, and He doesn't make junk. Well, you might ask yourself then, well, how did we get to this place? Why is it that there's different people of colors? What color was Adam and Eve? A lot of us, even in churches, have been taught, well, Adam and Eve were white. That's not true. Genetically, it's impossible for 2 white people to create people of darker skin. And just like it's impossible for 2 dark-skinned people to create lighter-colored people. So they were brown, most likely. Or in fact, genetically, they had to have been brown. But after the flood, I'm going to explain how this happened. All people descended from Noah, his 3 sons. Genesis 9:19 says, these were the 3 sons of Noah, and from them came the people who were scattered over the whole earth. And so, right, humanity rebelled, God judged them, the flood came, Noah and his sons were saved. When they were saved, they got to repopulate. We're all related then through Noah back to Adam. But mankind once again rebelled against God. They wanted to create and build a tower reaching to the heavens to proclaim that they were as good as God or as great as God. And when they all came together speaking one language, God confounded their language. That's why it's called the Tower of Babel. You know, when you hear somebody, they're not making sense, they're just babbling. That's what it felt like. And as soon as the language was mixed up, people began not being suspicious of one another. Like, I don't know what you're saying, you know. And because of that, people started to separate and move away from each other into whatever language God had given them at that time. I want to read this to you. This is in Genesis chapter 11. Let me read this, and I'll come back and start making some final comments here. This is the Tower of Babel. Now, the whole world had one language and a common speech. As people moved eastward, they found a plain in Shinar and settled there. They said to each other, come, let us make bricks and bake them thoroughly. They used bricks instead of stone and tar for mortar. Then they said, come, let us build ourselves a city with a tower that reaches to the heavens, so that we may make a name for ourselves. Otherwise, we will be scattered over the face of the whole earth. But the Lord came down to see the city and the tower the people were building. The Lord said, if as one people speaking the same language they have begun to do this, then nothing they plan to do will be impossible for them. Come, let us, by the way, another proof text that God is not just one, but God is three in one. Come, let us go down and confuse their language so they will not understand each other. So the Lord scattered them from there over all the earth. And they stopped building the city. That is why it's called Babel, because there the Lord confused the language of the whole world. From there the Lord scattered them over the face of the whole earth. And what happened as they got scattered, the human race, the gene pool, got divided up. And by the way, and you know this if you're into like animals and you're trying to preserve animals in the zoo lives and all that other thing, they need fresh gene pool coming in. Otherwise, you begin to weed out certain features that are healthy. And one of those things was, as people went to different areas, adaptation began. And all of a sudden, this group of people that was living in an area that was predominantly very, very cold and long winters started to develop over time, over a few generations, skin that was lighter and lighter. There was less melanin. People that went to very hot places, they started producing more melanin in their skin. And after a certain number of generations, now that was locked in. That's where the races came from. But what happened at that time is this, that man's rebellion forever set unique people groups against each other. And that's just part of the fallout of the overall fall of man. It is this embedded racism. It's embedded in your heart. It's embedded in my heart. And the only thing that can root that out is the Lord Jesus and his great love for us and the truth of his word. I want to close with this. Jeremiah 17:9 says, the heart is deceitful above all things and beyond cure. Who can understand it? And I want to challenge you, if we are going to pull up, because you talk about thoughts. Thoughts are like a seed. You plant a seed and things grow. And the seed of evolution, of Darwinism, has covered the world. And we have got to get busy with pulling up those plants and replacing them with creation. If there was anything I would say you should protest, is you should protest our educational system and say, bring back teaching on creation. Bring back God in our schools. That is the answer. That is the answer. Where's it all going to end? Well, at the second return of Christ, obviously it's going to end. But it starts with each one of us. You've got to search your own soul. I don't want to hear anybody just say without even searching, well, I'm colorblind. I don't see color. Wait a minute. Don't go there so quickly. Ask God to search. What is there in you? God, root this out. This is not of you, God. Help me to see people the way you see people, created in your image, loved by you. That's how I want to see them too. And if we can get on that plane, I guarantee you we're going to start treating each other the way God expects us to treat each other, like the true family that we are. 1 John 4:18 says, there is no fear in love because perfect love drives out fear. The only way to love another person is to see them as equal to you, to see them as they are because they are equal to you. There is nobody less than you. Nobody. There is nobody more than you. This is God's design. But we've been taught something else. Let me pray. Father, it's my prayer that this truth would set people free. Lord, that until we can see you as our creator, until we can know that we have been made in your image, until we can know that we are all perfectly loved, not based on the color of our skin or the language we speak, but based on the intrinsic value you've given us at creation, we're going to have problems. And the problem's in the human heart, Lord. I pray you come heal us. You allow each one of us to search our hearts deeply to confess whatever biases and prejudices we have, and to be difference makers in our culture. I pray this in the power of your name, Jesus. Amen.